we get into the video essay proper, we're going to have to establish a little bit of background information. First up, what is political lesbianism? Political lesbianism is, or was, as it was more common during second wave feminism from the 60s to the early 80s, a form of sexual orientation wherein women would prioritize romantic and sexual relationships with other women regardless of their own personal sexual orientation. Next up, what is feminist separatism? Feminist separatism is another theory from second-wave feminism which holds that women can only ever escape patriarchal oppression by fully segregating themselves from men and male society. Feminist separatism holds that a society built entirely by women and entirely made up of women would inherently be more peaceful than the society in which we currently live. And finally, what is horse sex? Now let's get into the video essay. As I'm sure we are all aware, the Holdfast Chronicles, the feminist post-apocalyptic 4-book series, began with Walk to the End of the World, published by Suzy charnas in 1974, and was followed up by Motherlines, The Furies, and The Conqueror's Child over the course of the next 20 years, and some of these are even half-decent books. Walk to the End of the World is one of these half-decent books, despite the fact that it does not feature the political, lesbian, feminist, separatist, horse-sex communes, which made the rest of the series famous. I'm just gonna call it TWU. TWU is a feminist satire which tells the story of a world ravaged by nuclear war. The only people left alive inhabit a tiny patch of coastal land in what was once, I'm pretty sure, Louisiana, though certain sources, like Wikipedia, disagree, eking out a meager existence subsisting almost entirely on seaweed and algae and marijuana. The beasts, you see, were exterminated in the nuclear war. And thank God the Father, because beasts are a sign of great evil. But even worse than beasts, the evil races whose red skins, brown skins, yellow skins, black skins, skins all the colors of fresh-turned earth, mark them as mere treacherous limitations of men who are white. Youths who repudiated their father's ways, animals that raided men's crops, and waylaid and killed men in the wild places of the world. And most of all, the men's own cunning, greedy females. Those were the rebels who caused the downfall of men's righteous rule. Men call them unmen. Of all the unmen, only females and their young remain, still the enemies of men. From Charnas, The Slave and the Free, a combined copy of The Walk to the End of the World and Motherlines. So, yeah, this post-apocalyptic satire gets right into it right the fuck away. Book 1 of the Holdfast Chronicles is set in the satire of a failing WASP state that is the Refuge, also known as the Holdfast, from which the series draws its name. The minuscule plot of land on which all men of the world, who are all white men, subsist. Them and their pet femmes. The Refuge is a hyper-misogynist society. Women are little more than beasts and little less than slaves, and the men detest even needing to endure the sight of them, the sound of their voices, or being forced to have sex with them. As two of our protagonists, Ikar Beck the Intendant and Captain Kelms the Junior, say, the Intendant said, "They shouldn't be allowed to sing. Don't you find their voices disturbing?" Most men were entirely too preoccupied with the creatures, in Kelm's opinion. No. I do. The Intendant put up his hood. This comes from Walk to the End of the World, page 29. Aren't those two just so charming? And these are the least bad misogynists we ever see. Ikar Beck, as the Intendant, is a station which essentially makes him the Dr. Kevorkian for this hyper-misogynist, pseudo-militaristic society. He helps old men commit suicide with dignity instead of dying weakly, and he is on the run from doing exactly that. He is also the only man in the entire refuge who knows who his father is, and in the refuge, fathers and sons are destined to murder each other. This causes Akarbek to have insane daddy issues, as you may well imagine. And these are insane daddy issues even in terms of holdfast-ish society, wherein all young boys are constantly terrified that their father will appear at the school for young boys where all the young boys live, and that this adult man will murder them. Akarbek's daddy issues are worse. Captain Combs is 20 years older than Akarbek, and so should technically be a senior rather than a junior. The dichotomy on which the holdfast majority runs, rather than male-female, as in our society, is junior-senior. Captain Combs has refused a promotion to seniorhood, because as a senior, despite having access to more resources, he would no longer be on the front lines with his rovers, who are brainwashed human soldiers. A promotion to senior would make Captain Combs an official DILF. However, because he has consistently refused this promotion, he is only a DILF by technicality. Legally, he remains a junior. He is 20 years older than Akarbek, and so, with Akarbek's daddy issues, you can well fucking imagine the chemistry between these two. Captain Combs is also a furry, and possibly the only furry left in the entire world, and he discovers this on his first ever drug trip, which happens when he is escorting a criminal. We get to see this drug tip in detail as it is crucial to the plot that we see our third protagonist, a man named Servan D. Leo, guide a group of men through some weird dom subgroup hypnosis. DeLeo told them to forget all that and give him control. He would show them how to free their souls for the delight of knowing what they were, not what they ought to be. It was seditious nonsense that undermined manly self-discipline and integrity, but he made it attractive. "Let me teach you," DeLeo murmured, "to relax your mind and soul, to open the dark core of yourself and free what lives there." Revolted, Kelms looked away. For himself, he realized he had hoped to see beasts. Real beasts, hot-hided, pungently scented alien beings. Not the pathetic perversions of other men. This comes from Walk to the End of the World, pages 47 and 48. Once again, this dom subgroup hypnosis drug trip is all as crucial to the plot as marijuana itself is to the society of incels as a Fallout faction. Our three scumbags, Akarbek, Captain Kelms, and Servendi Leo, are on a mission which doesn't really matter. They're off to see the wizard, and they stop in a locale known as the Bio, where they take along a femme to serve as a slave. They encounter this femme while she is processing the corpses of other women for feed, just so we're clear on how hyper-misogynist this society is. Oh, sorry. It's feed specifically and only for the femmes. It's not like men could ever deign to eat the flesh of... The woman's name is Alldera, and she is the star of the Holdfast Chronicles, the future conqueror thereof, and she goes through hell and back in this and future books. She and Akarbek are sort of trauma-bonded. However, he does rape her. He is not the only man who rapes her in this book, and the other man forces her to eat mud after the fact. I do not wish to defend sexual violence in any way, shape, or form. Akarbek remains a protagonist in future books, and at a certain point it seems that alldera stops to hold a grudge against him, if ever she did. I will say that the rape which Akarbek committed was committed while both he and alldera were being held captive by another character, and after Captain Kelms had already been murdered. However, despite the extenuating circumstances, he did rape her. Speaking of Captain Kelms's death, tragically, he passes away without ever even learning about knotted dildos or about letting Akar Beck suck him off. Akar, Servan, and alldera are all, after this, captured by Akar's dad, who is a formerly respected senior, who is now holed up in a fortified city far to the west side of the holdfast. The holdfast, you see, cannot continue. The harvest of seaweed, and presumably marijuana, have been dropping year after year. There is simply not enough food, and the seniors who hoard food and other resources are exacerbating the issue. Now, you might be worried that Akar's dad really does want to murder him, but fret not, fret not. In fact, Megamas, and what a name, is just looking for an heir, which is a concept somewhat unheard of in Holdfast. Not at all. It's a very sensible custom. In the old days, a man used to have a son to take over his property, further his plans, and generally see to the honor and the prosperity of his bloodline after, when the time came. Megamas stood glancing restlessly about him, took up a stack of papers from a table, and began looking through the pages as he continued. Now, Megamas is also even more hyper-misogynist than usual. Mind you, sons turned against their fathers even before the wasting, but I'm convinced that that was a result of the warping influence of their dams. Ancient men very carelessly left the education of their young boys primarily to femmes. But despite being a hyper-misogynist, he did super solve that food problem. Flavor, flavor, repeated Megamas impatiently. Of their meat. Haven't you been listening? I'm talking economy, total utilization of the few resources that are going to be left to us. Why else would I have had the Troy femmes killed, if not for their meat? You didn't think I could pack Troy with enough lamins and lavers to feed my men for long. We would need a dozen Troys to hold that much seaweed. Eating femme flesh seems bizarre to you now, but believe me, you'll get used to it. You have no choice. You've already started. These three excerpts come from Walk to the End of the World, page 190, pages 260 to 261, and pages 205 to 206. He's like a super turbo hyper misogynist. But hey, feminism win. Akar Beck murders him. And a second feminism win, he tells alldera where her best path to escape the holdfast is. And with that, the coming war between Megamas forces and the rest of the refuge. Feminism fail, it is Akar Beck doing this, so. The third protagonist of Walk to the End of the World, Servan Leo, is called the Dark Dreamer because he's really good at marijuana, and I mean that literally. He is also Akar's Beck ex. Current ongoing abusive situationship? Certainly the future abusive situationship. He doesn't really matter. He is complete and utter evil in all ways, shapes, and forms, and basically any time that he is on page, he is abusing and mutilating a woman. But he is a main character in this fucking book, so. Akar Beck has broken up with Servan Leo at this point in the narrative. In fact, he did that shortly before he murdered his father. And Walk to the End of the World ends with Servan Leo approaching the wreckage of the grand battle at the gates of Troy, while alldera watches from above before she departs the holdfast and flees into the wilds. Almost none of that plot matters at all in the Sisterhood. The next book, Motherlines, starts with alldera almost dying in the wilds before she is rescued by a riding woman. alldera mistakes the woman on a horse for some kind of centaur beast when she first sees her, so you can imagine the state of holdfast ecology. The riding woman herself is called Shiel Toranor. She doesn't really like alldera because alldera stole Shiel's food, and for other feminist satire reasons. However, Shield does take Aldera back to her home camp, which is where we finally see political, lesbian, feminist, separatist, horse, sex, communes. At the commune to which Shield takes her, Aldera receives a government-assigned lesbian polycule while comatose and pregnant. In fact, the principal reason that Aldera is permitted to remain with the riding women, rather than being sent to the T camp where the other escapes from the holdfast live, is because of her pregnancy, since she's bringing new DNA into the wilds. Now, you're gonna want to hold on to your seats for this next reveal. The riding women, you see, are political, lesbian, feminist, separatist, horse-sex clone communes. There are essentially only 7 women out in the wilds, although they have been cloned so many times that there's a population in at least the thousands. The government-assigned lesbian clone polycule breastfeeds Aldera while she is comatose, and they think that this will make it possible for Aldera's future daughter, whose father, from all the evidence, was not a horse, to have viable sexual relations with a stallion and become pregnant. It doesn't make sense, Aldera objected desperately. Nanisi, I know that a stallion's cock is as long as your arm. You'd have your guts shoved right out through your mouth if you let one do that to you. Nanisi rubbed at her jaw and said reasonably, that would be true for femmes. This is our way. It was worked out for us by the first daughters. They saw that after the wasting there wouldn't be any place like the lab, and we would need some way to breed simpler than the lab way. So these lab-changed women designed their daughter's reproduction to be set off by the seed of a stallion. Take Cheyenne. She has a blood child over in Floating Moon Camp. The horse she mated with is not that child's sire. His seed only started Cheyenne's seed growing, and Cheyenne's seed was complete with Cheyenne's traits. No room for any others. We are not half horse, as ignorant free femmes tell each other. This comes from The Slave and the Free, pages 295 to 296. You're not bound to us to begin with by being part of an old mother line, and you won't be truly bound until your blood child mates. Cheyenne says that, meanwhile, you should open to a horse yourself, even with no chance of issue. But that's absurd. You're not young and flexible enough anymore to safely... No, I can't, Aldera gasped. Why are you talking like this to me? Don't you see I can't follow? Are you worried about your child's mating? Nanisi said with concern. Don't be. The stud doesn't attack anyone. He means no harm. No abuse or degradation. He's innocent. He has to be led and coaxed and trained to do his part, with our help. It's nothing at all like a man overpowering a femme just to show her who is master. This is from page 297 of The Slave and the Free. That's Nanisi Connor, one of the nicest members of the government-assigned lesbian clone polycule, explaining her horse sex to Aldera. Nanisi Connor also tenderly breastfed Aldera herself while Aldera was comatose. So now that we know that Nanisi is the kinder member of the polycule, and that she is trying to get Aldera to have sex with a horse, let's take a look at Shield's take on Aldera. Loving, Shield snorted. I hardly think about the man-used bitch now that our tent family has separated, and it's never with love. This comes from page 351 of The Slave and the Free. So, you know, with this kind of treatment, it's little wonder that Aldera abandons the riding women and her daughter for the camp of free femmes, fellow runaways who remember the trauma of the holdfast and don't call each other bitches for having been abused. Often. They call each other bitches for other reasons, most of which we don't need to care about. But if any part of this essay convinces you to read these books, first, your mind is my mind, baby. And second, just remember that Fetica is the queen of bisexual feminist situationship drama and problem-causing. Now, we do not get to see Aldera's daughter, Sorrel, attempt to have sex with a stallion in either of these first 2 books. She won't be old enough until at least the next book, and I don't believe we get her narrative again until the 4th book. When she does try, she fails, obviously, because breastfeeding someone while they're pregnant does not pass your genes on to their unborn child, you perverts. However, we do get to see a mating, you perverts. By dawn, the last stallion and the last dancer had been escorted away. The dust had settled, and the bedding chute was built. The Hilliers had put it together this year in the neat, casual-looking way that they did everything. Some called it the saddle, because this was the horse's turn to ride. It was a rectangular box with 3 closed sides, an open top, and a high floor. The insides of the floor and walls were padded with leather cushions. Arched across the open top and joining the 2 long walls was a carefully padded superstructure to take the weight of the stallion and the grip of his forelegs. It would suspend his body over the young woman lying inside the box. There were ropes to release an escape trap for a woman whose mating went wrong and endangered her. This next section is an explicit excerpt of the mating, so trigger warning. The haunt climbed into the chute and lay down on her back. One of her share-mothers got in with her to encourage and caress her so she would be moist and open to her stud. Sheil remembered well the smooth wooden rests against which she had braced her bare feet and watching the support frame dark against the sky. Polly Roy, her friend, had lain down with her, kissing her neck. Polly was gone now many years, struck dead in her saddle by lightning while still a youth. Into the circle of onlookers came 2 of the haunt's family. The bay stallion stepped along neatly between them. They walked with their hands on his withers and his neck. They talked into its flicking ears. Small, sedate, groomed so the sunlight shimmered on his hide, he was scarcely recognizable as one of the wild-eyed studs of last night's dance. His feet were filed and oiled, and ribbons of dyed leather were braided into his mane and tail. He was called Tiptoe, and was bred from the home herd of Salmawan Tent in Melting Earth Camp. Sheil's first stud had been a nameless chestnut with a lop ear. She had looked up and seen his familiar crooked silhouette and the little beard of whiskers on his jaw, so well known to her and so ridiculous that all her fear had dissolved. Awe and joy had filled her, that the instrument of her own joining with the great patterns of the world should be so ordinary a creature. Well, so was she, yet both she and the stud embodied the dependence of all beings on each other and the kinship of creatures. This was the mystery of the mating, its beauty and necessity. She had spoken softly to him above the singing voices of the gathered women, and he had entered her as smoothly as the staff of oiled leather with which she had stretched herself in practice for him. After the culling that year, his flesh had gone to help nourish the child that he had started in her belly. Her second stud, a barrel-bodied gray, had sired a number of fine foals after mating with her. The handlers rubbed the neck and chest of the little stallion. They stroked his face and nostrils with pads that had been run under the tails of mares in season. He began to throw his head and snort, and within a few moments they had him erect. Under the touch of hands well known to him, he reared high and clamped his forelegs on the padded support frame. He gripped the leather roll at the chute's head and rattled it with his teeth. Standing outside the gate, the handlers stroked his sweating neck and shoulders and bent to guide him. Suddenly, he thrust forward against the wooden braces, which prevented him from entering fully. He oscillated his rump, snorting loudly, and his tail jerked, marking the rhythm of his ejaculation. Within seconds, it seemed, he pulled back and stood dark with sweat, drooped, quiet. Others of her family reached to help the young haunt up, but she was already on her feet in the chute. She swung her robe about herself with a grand gesture that showed as well as anything could her triumphant success. They closed around her, checking her for injury, mopping the milky overflow from her thighs. With her arms on the shoulders of 2 of them, she walked briskly from the dance ground. A new candidate had already stepped out from the crowd. Now, absolutely none of that matters in relation to the sisterhood. But let's get back to the book series. The third book in the series, The Furies, chronicles alldera and company's conquest of a kinder, gentler holdfast, by which I mean that the slaves get to wear hats. The feminist politics only get stranger in the series from here, and more overt. Ultimately, though, the series ends after the violent revolution, with hopes for equality someday in the future. Suffice to say that the movie that I think was adapted from the Holdfast Chronicles takes into account almost none of the gender politics therein.
The final war leveled the old world to the ground. It also demolished all form of order. Warlords ruled with iron fist and ravaged the land. The strong prevailed, the weak fell by the wayside. Amidst this chaos and anarchy, a band of gifted women roamed the outlands, pledged to the sacred duty of restoring peace and equality.
The Sisterhood is the sort of fundamentally uncreative B-movie that opens with a solid minute and a half of shaky cam on a still image. According to New Horizons Media, who released this film, and I'm sure that they are very happy that I mentioned that, the year is 2021 AD. Women have been enslaved by a brutal army of men who survived the nuclear holocaust. Their only hope for freedom is in the hands of a nomadic band of fierce she-warriors, the Sisterhood. Now, before I explain anything else about the Sisterhood, let me be clear. I have no evidence that Cirio H. Santiago had ever even heard of Suzy McKee Charnas, much less read her groundbreaking post-apocalyptic feminist novel series. For all I know, this is all one terrible coincidence. I mean, the apocalypse, a bunch of women warriors, none of these tropes are exactly unique to Charnas. Now, first of all, I just want to say that the Sisterhood is a far less sophisticated piece of media than the Holdfast Chronicles. I don't want to say that it is stupider than the Holdfast Chronicles, although it is, but less sophisticated, I think, is a fair way to put things. While the broad strokes of the world-building are the same, with a hyper-misogynistic male-led society being occasionally fought by the wandering she-warriors, and in fact, even parts of the plot are similar, in that the plot of the film takes focus on a young woman who is escaping from this hyper-misogynistic society, all while a strange and violent man, who seems to have other motivations, is following her. So let's real quick delve into possibly the main difference between these two. In the Holdfast Chronicles, women die. A lot. The Holdfast is a place where no woman is ever safe. She cannot be outside of the home because she will be murdered. She cannot be inside of the home because she is a woman and so has no home. Some of the excerpts of the novels which I did not read to you all include the fact that the women sleep beneath their carry sacks, which they hold usually on their backs. And some of the women, in fact, have deteriorated into being unable to speak intelligently. In the Sisterhood, our main character runs around in Levi's. The main character of the Sisterhood is a young woman by the name of Maria, spelled with a Y according to IMDb. So let's discuss a few of the differences between alldera and Maria. First up, for lack of a better term, Maria is a pick-me. She is a woman living in one of these hyper-misogynistic post-nuclear societies, except she has apparently managed to gain the trust of the leader of this society. And so he treats her a little bit better than the other witches who dwell within.
Sir Stab, there's raiders in the Western Hills.
Patrols have seen no one.
Lady Shree did! They attacked travelers at the Devil's Cut.
There's no one out there, little witch.
There were 3 raiders and 2 travelers. They got away, but Lady Shree said that they...
My men have scoured the entire area for miles around in all directions. They've seen no raiders.
Lord Newfield told me to
Lord
tell you...
Newfield has better things to do than listening to the ravings of a little witch. How the hell did you get him to believe you talk with a bird?
Alldera would not stand for this bullshit, and in fact, Alldera talks a lot in the later books about how much she hates post-nuclear pick-me's who constantly help the men to murder and cannibalize other women. Holdfast Chronicles gets weird later, don't worry about it. There are two other key differences between alldera and Madia. For one thing, we never see any birth family of alldera's. She eventually does have a daughter later in the series, but we never hear tell of her parents or of her siblings. Madia, on the other hand, has a younger brother. She's been taking care of him ever since their parents died and they fled the Western Kingdom. And, you know, he tries to help her out too. He's a younger brother in a hyper-misogynistic society, and so sometimes when the other men start trying to stone his sister to death, he runs up to them and tells them to stop. He's a good kid. The other main difference is that alldera is, so far as we know, an ordinary human woman. She has somewhat stronger legs than average because she likes to run, but otherwise, she's an average woman. Madia, on the other hand, can
Speak with the hawk?
Now, according to the Sisterhood, both the film and the in-universe organization, these psychic powers were somewhat common even before the bombs, and are now even more common after a complete nuclear apocalypse has devastated the Earth's surface. However, only women can be psychic. Now, besides Maria, one of our other main characters, and the only other male main character, is some guy whose name I didn't care to write down in my notes, so I'm gonna call him Some Guy. We're introduced to Some Guy when he is attacking a member of the Sisterhood and trying to murder and or rape her. However, this member of the Sisterhood allows him to depart freely without harming him. This is very kind of her, especially considering that in the Holdfast Chronicles, the women who were essentially the Sisterhood in the book would have straight up murdered this guy just for standing next to a woman. We learn later that Some Guy used to have a sister who ran away from him to join the Sisterhood. I think this is supposed to make him more sympathetic. It doesn't work. Maybe it's just supposed to be a parallel with Maria, who has a younger brother. That also doesn't really work, because Some Guy straight up murders Maria's brother. Some Guy murders Maria's brother while he and his army are invading the kingdom in which Maria is living. Maria has just enough time to see Some Guy slide his blade into her brother's ribcage before he departs, and she is able to have a nice tableau with her brother's dead body. This is what really kicks off the plot of the Sisterhood. Maria rides away from the ruins of her kingdom on the back of a horse, with whom I don't believe she can speak. Maria very soon encounters the the she-warriors, Ali and Vera, in a bar fight. Well, and the name of that bar is Dynamite Willie's. Dynamite Willie is the best character in this movie, the only character whose name I remember, the only character I would recognize out on the street, and the best bar in this movie, and the only bar I ever want to drink at from now on. But he's not really central to the plot, so unfortunately, we're going to have to move on from Dynamite Willie.
Stop it! Stop that goddamn fighting! It's against the compact! Stop it! Stop it, I said! God damn it, I'm closing this place down! You want you have 3 days! 3 days till you get to the next stop! Stop it! Goddamn sons of lizards! I'm gonna blow this place up! I'm gonna blow this place to smithereens! Alright, now listen! I'm gonna blow this place to kingdom come! Get out of my bar! Now! Get out! I might be crazy, but I'm not stupid!
Now, Ali and Vera don't seem to be very good warriors, although I suppose they are still only maidens. The only reason that they were in Dynamite Willie's to save Maria to begin with is because they got tired of riding around so much and wanted to have a hot bubble bath. Oh, I'm sorry, I misread my script. Cirio H. Santiago wanted them to get naked on camera. We also see some guy finally start to follow around the sisterhood after their confrontation in Dynamite Willie's. This is where we learned about how only women get to be psychic in the future. Ali, or maybe Vera, I really didn't care to keep track of who was who, has the power to telekinetically fling small objects around. And then Vera, or maybe Ali, again, I did not keep track of who had which name, has the power to heal small wounds. We only see her use this power once, and never in the context of a bar fight. Now, as is tradition with 1980s B-movies, especially 1980s post-apocalyptic B-movies, especially 1980s post-apocalyptic B-movies shot in Southern California, the next 20-30 minutes of the movie are all various players in the plot running around the SoCal desert and a single forest. Some guy who has been tracking the sisterhood this whole time that everybody was running around the SoCal desert finally catches up to them in this forest. He also successfully manages to capture one of these vicious she-warriors. Maria and the unkidnapped she-maiden immediately set off tracking down the kidnapped she-maiden. However, the two are going to have to travel through great danger in order to get to her. In fact, they're forced to traverse a very dangerous canyon, full of nothing but the most wretched and base of creatures, a place of pure violence and death. Ali can put it better than I can. Ali, how did you call this place again?
We'll cut through the forbidden zone, but be careful. That's where the things live.
What things?
The time before wasn't totally a golden age. They performed terrible experiments. And then after the Great War, the radiation made the mutations even worse.
Now, I want to warn you all. Cirio H. Santiago gets really intense with the frightful imagery of the things that live in the Forbidden Zone. Right, so the things are a very, very, very big threat. Luckily, though, Maria and Ali managed to fall into a cave, which is, not hard, but they fell into the right cave, which is slightly more difficult. The cave is lit in bright green, but don't worry, that's not radioactive, because... Hang on, why is it not radioactive again, girls? So
We're lucky the light's only from the plants.
Yeah, but that's green light. It's radiation, isn't it?
No. It would only be radiation if it were coming from the rocks.
So once they have gotten past the glowing green, but definitely not radioactive at all, plants, Maria and Ali are faced with the door to a fallout shelter. They manage to get through just as those things are gurring their way towards them, and they are faced now with very bad computer voice acting.
Identify yourself, please. Identify yourself, please.
And seen Maria and Ali walk around the computer into the real fallout shelter. This bunker is chock full of weapons. It looks like maybe it used to be a government bunker. It has one of those world maps with the dots of where the ballistic targets are on the wall, and it has those clocks with all the clocks are stopped at the different time zones time when the bombs fell. But it's not really important who used to own the bunker. What is important is that Maria and Ali have just found a bunker full of every single weapon they can imagine, and they are going to use them with pleasure. Maria and Ali begin their assault against the men at some guy's camp. They got a war wagon. The war wagon has rockets to fire, and they got people to fire those rockets at, baby. The two are successful in rescuing Vera, with a little bit of light fan service to go along with it, which was their original goal. However, now that they know that there are other women who are being held captive by some guy in King Hakar, they have to go and rescue them. After all, only the she-warriors of the Sisterhood can protect women in this nuclear apocalypse world. The assault on King Hakar's castle, in and of itself, is not very interesting. King Hakar is warned that there are witches outside the gates, and that these witches want to kill him. King Hakar does some misogyny, and fails to prepare for the women's assault. So, when the women begin climbing over the walls and attacking all of the men within, really, it's kind of a one-sided battle. At a certain point in the battle, Maria finally encounters some guy, and even succeeds in wounding him. Both Ali and Vera are convinced that Maria is about to murder this man for having murdered her own younger brother. And in fact, some guy thinks so too, as he tells her to just do it, in that 1980s B-movie bad guy / tough guy way. But Maria refuses to murder him. She's simply too good and too kind and too forgiving. And not very interesting, so we're gonna move on from that. What is interesting is the end of the battle. The battle begins to end when the women who invaded King Hakar's castle are cornered in the dungeon where all the women of King Hakar's castle were already chained up. King Hakar's forces are bursting down the door. They will kill the women when they manage to get inside. What can they do? How will the women manage to survive this?
Sisters, have you lost faith? Why do you resort to the old ways and take up arms? Do you no longer trust in me?
So, the closest I have ever gotten to a church service was watching a friend's first communion service from outside while it happened. So, it tickles me a little bit pink that this movie confirms that the religion practiced by the Sisterhood is explicitly and innately correct in this universe. There is a literal woman god in this universe who will appear to women who are suffering and lead them away. And I think that's very, very funny to do, especially in a post-apocalypse movie. Like, the nuclear war wasn't enough to get God down here, but some women in a BDSM dungeon, not really chained up, is? This part, at least, I can say for certain, Cirio H. Santiago did not steal from Suzy McKee Charnas. Now that Girl Jesus is here, she makes all of the women vanish from King Hagar's castle. And that's kind of the end of the movie. That's the last line we ever hear a woman speak in the film. Our last shot of the film is from a distance, as the women cross the top of a mountain covered in hoods. The movie ends with some guy talking to us. I wish I could even recommend The Sisterhood as a good bad movie. It's something funny to watch with your friends while you're stoned or drunk or whatever. But I just can't. It's not a good movie. It's not funny bad, it's not interesting, it doesn't present any unique ideas. It just is. And like I said, Cirio H. Santiago is a close friend of Roger Corman. But this is 100% the closest we will ever get to a feature film adaptation of the Holdfast Chronicles. I mean, you guys all know why. We're not going to get political, lesbian, feminist, separatist, horse sex politics from Pixar or anything, much as I may pray. But hey, this is a movie. I compared it to a book which has a lot of similarities with it. And hopefully, if you're watching this video and hearing me say these words at this timestamp, you might be thinking about checking out either the Holdfast Chronicles or the Sisterhood. Let me know. Tell me what you thought of either. Tell me what you thought of this movie. Tell me what you thought of this YouTube video. Tell me what you thought of the books. Tell me what you thought of Charnas if you found her on Facebook. I like to talk to people. Thanks everybody so much for watching. I've been your host. I'll hopefully be your host again. And I'll talk to you soon.
Kill! Pillage! Rape! Do what feels good! But whatever you do, do not come back without those parts I need!
Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching. This is not my first ever made video essay. It is my first one that I'm ever posting to YouTube, though. I hope you enjoyed, and if you didn't, well, you just wasted 45 minutes of your life, which is more than I wasted making this. If you want to see more from me, you're going to have to subscribe. I don't think that the YouTube algorithm is going to show you any of my future videos if you don't. But if you don't subscribe, no hard feelings. I'm doing this for fun, and I hope you had fun watching. Okay, bye for real now.